Please like and subscribe.
Auction. Dust hung in the air, like a dense golden blanket, dead and motionless. Not even footsteps moved it. Time seemed frozen in this forgotten town on the edge of the map. There was no train station, no telegraph, no hope, only heat, the smell of horse manure and human greed. The main street was a miserable mixture of planks and dirt, rotten planks and scattered stones. People gathered here, harsh faces, hat shadows that looked like whip marks, dust embedded in every wrinkle. Their eyes showed no sympathy. They glittered with excitement. Human auctions are a rare but not forbidden spectacle, especially when a criminal's widow was on display. On the wagon, in the middle of the platform, stood a woman, pregnant, young. Her dress had once been blue, but now it was sunburnt and stained. It hung sack-like from her shoulders. Her face was thin and restrained, as if carved from stone. Only a subtle tremor in her chin betrayed fear. It was Mary Ellen Redford. There was a boy standing next to him, barefoot with scratches on his arms. His eyes were not childlike. There was an emptiness in them, the kind of emptiness no child should have to live with. He wasn't her son, but she held his hand, as if it were the last thread that connected her to humanity.
"Now, gentlemen,"
shouted the auctioneer, perched on an empty barrel.
"this is the widow of the famous Johnny Redford. He fell under bullets, but he left behind something valuable. This woman and a future heir. And also this boy she's got with her. 3 at once, gentlemen. Who'll start the bidding?"
The crowd laughed. Someone whistled. Someone swore. One man shouted,
10 cents and fleas to boot.
The crowd laughed. Another started to pull out his wallet, but only for looks. Women were rarely sold, but when they did, it was always a spectacle. Mary Ellen stood as if tied to the wagon. She did not tremble. She did not beg. She didn't cry. She'd already been through hell, lost her husband even though he was a bandit, spent a week in the mountains without food, buried a friend who died in childbirth. The boy, the son of that woman, became her cross. Her gaze slid over the faces in the crowd. She looked for even a shadow of sympathy, but there was none. Suddenly, from deep within the crowd came a sound.
$100.
The voice was not a shout. It was calm and confident. It was as if what was said had no price. Everyone turned around. He stepped out of the shadows 1 step at a time, slowly, as if in no hurry, tall, with the lean body of a man who'd lived most of his life in the saddle, eyes the color of scorched earth, dust on his boots, as if he had come from the horizon. That was Eli Weston.
$100,
he repeated.
for her and the baby.
There was silence. Even the flies stopped buzzing. The auctioneer coughed.
"Well, if no one else offers..."
He looked around.
"It's sold! To the gentleman with the scar on his cheek."
The hammer struck the wood. The sound was like a gunshot. Mary Ellen did not move. She squeezed the boy's hand tighter. He looked at her fearfully. Eli was already approaching the wagon. He didn't smile or make any sudden movements. He just lifted his head, looked her in the eye, and held out his hand.
My name is Eli Weston. I don't buy slaves. I give a name and a roof. The rest is up to you.
Her lips trembled. This was neither savior nor executioner. This was a man who saw her not as an item, but as a human being. She put her hand in his palm, and the world around her changed. The dust that had been swirling in the air a moment ago gradually settled. The noise of the auction faded. A deafening silence remained. Even his own breathing was hard to hear. But to Mary Ellen, standing on the threshold of the unknown, that silence sounded like a beginning. The beginning of something that had not been promised, but had suddenly become possible. She lowered her gaze. Clutching the boy's hand tightly, she stepped with Eli away from the wagon and the human callousness. The dust beneath their feet became less and less visible, dissolving into the evening gloom. and now the wooden boards of the porch were beneath my feet. Eli's quiet house, where the walls heard no screams, and the air was filled not with fear, but with the faint warmth of hope. Here, in this simple shelter, the past slowly began to recede, giving way to something new and cautious, a name in exchange for salvation. Eli's house stood in silence, where every sound seemed an echo of the past. Mary, tired and weary, let herself feel for the first time that this was a place to breathe, a place to be. The boy, who had long kept his eyes empty, looked up and for the first time saw Eli not as a master, but as a protector. A note of trust began to emerge between them. Eli Weston's house was shrouded in an almost palpable silence. The wind rustled lazily through the cracks in the wooden walls, kicking up dust that settled in a thin layer. It was not a peaceful silence. Rather, it concealed pain and loneliness. Eli has lost too much. His wife and youngest son had died of fever a few years ago. Since then, the house had become his quiet fortress, where he lived in memories and bitter silence. His face reflected weariness, like sun-scorched earth, and his eyes seemed weary with expectation and disappointment. That evening, Mary Ellen, a young woman bought at auction for $100, entered the house for the first time. Pregnant, haggard and cold, she held a layer of distrust in her heart, and every glance seemed like torture. She didn't know what to expect. Her thoughts were confused. I'm a commodity, just a thing in someone else's hands. She was afraid that now her life would be no better than before, just an exchange of one prison for another. Eli wasn't talkative. He watched. At first they were silent, woman and man, bound by loss, but strangers to each other. She couldn't forgive him for buying her at auction and not imposing his rules. Instead of words, Eli made it simple. He gave her a name that became a symbol of freedom. She was no longer a nameless shadow to be neglected or priced out. The name was more than a word. It became a hope, a promise of a new life. Mary discreetly felt relieved for the first time in a long time. She could stay in this house, protected, where no one had a right to hurt her or the baby that was about to be born. For the first few hours, the house seemed foreign and cold, but night was falling outside the windows, and with it came a new phase in the life of a woman who had once been sold as a commodity. Now she was a person with a name, and that gave her the strength to believe that anything was possible, even happiness. Eli's house wasn't just walls and dust. It was home to the story of a man who had survived his own destruction but held on to the remnants of life. Every board, every creak in the floor was a reminder of the past, of the love and pain that had not gone away. Mary looked around, clinging to the familiar little things, the rough woolen blankets, the simple wooden chairs, the fireplace where the faint heat of the embers still smouldered. The house was not a palace, but there was a fragile peace here, like ice about to crack. She saw Eli as a man who did not throw words to the wind. His silence spoke louder than any promise. He didn't promise much, but what he did give was security and a chance to start over. Mary knew the past would not let go easily. There was a child growing inside her body, a reminder that life goes on, even when everything seems to be destroyed. Nearby, a boy whose gaze was no longer blank, and now he was no longer alone. The days passed slowly. Mary tried not to think about those who might come after her, not to give in to her fears. She was learning to trust the house, the people, and herself. Eli respected her silence, didn't demand explanations, or try to dull her pain with words. In their silence together, a bond was born, fragile, tentative, but real. Each evening, as the fire in the fireplace cast shadows on the walls, it seemed that this house could be more than just a refuge. Mary realized she had a name now, but with it came responsibility. Responsibility for herself, the child, and the boy who had become her shadow. Eli had given her freedom, the freedom to choose. Even if there were still people around with cruel looks, and there were mockery at the auction, a new chapter was beginning here, in this house. A chapter where she could become more than just a victim of fate. It was the first step on a long journey, a journey that would change her life and the lives of many. The first nights were cold, not only because of the temperature. Mary tossed and turned in her old bunk, feeling the invisible chains, not the ones from the auction, but the ones in her heart. Memories, fears, and doubts intertwined, keeping her awake. Outside, the creaking of branches, the howling of the wind, and the barking of dogs could be heard, scraps of life that went on. But inside, there was a silence that was hard to find common ground with. Eli was barely in the room, but his presence was felt in every detail. He didn't make empty promises or sing by the fireplace. His gestures were simple, careful as if he were afraid of hurting this fragile relationship. Mary struggled to find words to explain the fear and hostility. She didn't know how to ask or trust. All she could do was stand silently on the doorstep, watching a man who didn't consider her a commodity, but rather an abandoned traveler to be given a chance. The sun was at its zenith, scorching the ground and the walls. Eli appeared on the doorstep, as if from nowhere, and said quietly,
"Water at the well. The soup is warm. Take it if you want it."
It wasn't an order or a suggestion, just a right to choose. Mary stood in the shadows, looking at the bowl as if it were a trap. Her hands trembled, whether from hunger or fear, she couldn't tell. But she took a step. One. Then another. Taking the bowl, she sank down against the wall. Not at the table, she couldn't. The warmth of the soup touched her fingers and was unbearable. Too alive, too real. She swallowed the first spoonful slowly, the second spoonful almost in tears. The boy sitting in the corner looked up. There was something new in his face, not hope, but interest. For the first time in a long time, he whispered,
"Hot?"
Mary didn't turn, but nodded.
"Mine is hot."
She exhaled. The first response in many days. It wasn't a request or an excuse, just a word, a fact. She looked at the bowl again. She didn't know whether she felt gratitude, suspicion, fear, or quiet hope. But in that instant, the walls of the house were a little closer and the air not so prickly. Something inside shifted, a half step closer to life. In the days that followed, Mary noticed how Eli cared for the boy feeding him, helping him clean his wounds. Quiet actions spoke louder than words. Gradually, she realized this man wasn't looking for gain, he just wanted to give them protection. It was new, incomprehensible, but welcome. Eli was afraid too, afraid of losing again those who had become dear to him. But even so, he continued to hold out his hand, not as a host, but as a life-giver. So began their story, a story of trust, pain, and hope. Small steps, careful, like the first sprouts after a long winter. The days in the house flowed slowly, like a quiet river in the heat of the day. Mary was learning to see this place not as a prison, but as an island of peace. For the first time in a long time, she had moments in her life when she could just breathe without fear. She watched Eli, a man with rare but strong feelings. He wasn't waiting for gratitude, wasn't looking for a trick. He was just there, like a rock in a stormy stream, steady and unmoving. The boy who had become her shadow was gradually gaining confidence. His gaze became less blank, and the silence gave way to rare, genuine smiles. Mary realized that Eli had given her not only a roof over her head, but also the opportunity to call herself something more than a widow and hostage to fate. His words, "I gave you a name," now sounded like a vow, an invitation to a new life. Time passed, but the past did not let go easily. Sometimes at night, Mary would hear gunshots in her dreams, the crying of a child, screams that were not there in the present. And then she clutched the boy's hand tighter and remembered Eli's quiet breathing, the one who guarded their peace. There were no loud words or boisterous confessions between them, but in every little thing, in gestures, glances, and even silence, there was a thin thread of mutual respect. Eli didn't try to invade her inner world, he gave space and time. It wasn't just a refuge for him, it was a chance to correct his mistakes, to give a new life not only to others, but also to himself. And Mary, despite her fear and doubts, began to see in this house not only the shadow of the past, but the light of the future. A few weeks passed. A new silence settled in the house on the outskirts of the town, not the kind that presses, but the kind that promises peace. Mary Ellen gradually became accustomed to the measured rhythm of life. Early in the morning, she heard Eli had long since gone out into the field to plough the land, repair fences, take care of the farm. The man was reserved and sturdy, like the very earth beneath his feet. She was in no hurry to accept his gift of a name and security. It was not easy for her to believe that this house could become not just a refuge, but a home. The boy beside her was still silent, but occasionally he cast her a look of childlike wonder and cautious hope. Inside Mary there was a struggle. On the one hand, resentments and fears that had been through fire and water. On the other, a weak but lively desire to believe that it could be otherwise. Every day was a small battle for her, right to live and love again. Eli didn't interfere with her thoughts or feelings. He was just there, beside her, quietly supportive. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. His respect for her boundaries became Mary's support. One evening, as the sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky with pinks and golds, Mary sat by the fireplace and allowed herself to relax for the first time. The boy was playing quietly nearby, and Eli, returning from work, had brought fresh wood. She looked at him, and in that silence there was no tension between them. There was only understanding, complex and not immediately obvious, but real. Mary knew there were many challenges ahead. There was no more room for illusions in her life. But now she had a name given not on command, but out of a desire to protect and preserve. And that name was the first brick in the foundation of a new life, a life that was just beginning. As the days passed, the silence in Eli's house became almost palpable, as if the emptiness itself were filled with anticipation. Mary Ellen still kept her distance, as if she feared that any step toward him might result in a new wound. She watched Eli, his stern but honest hands, the way he patiently tended the wounded animals and mended the old fences. Her thoughts often returned to that day at the auction, when the hammer had struck the wood and her life had changed. "I gave you a name," he repeated, words that sounded almost like a prayer, "but I demand nothing in return." Those words slowly penetrated her heart, gently breaking the ice that shrouded her soul. The boy, whose eyes seemed empty, began to show signs of life. He watched Eli, repeated simple words after him, and sometimes, barely perceptibly, smiled. It was a small miracle to Mary, as if a tiny hope had risen from the ashes. The fire in the fireplace crackled quietly, as if whispering forgotten fairy tales. Shadows danced across the walls, giving the room a strange, illusory life. Mary sat on the floor with the blanket covering her feet, staring into the flames where memory meets hope. She didn't hear footsteps. Eli always moved as if he were afraid to disturb someone else's peace. He set a mug of water beside her, hot, just like the soup had been then. He sat down on the edge of the bench, not next to her, but close. There was a pause between them, not a void, but a space where something real could grow. A long silence, just wind and fire. Mary said softly, almost not believing it was her voice.
Are you always this quiet?
Eli turned his head slightly, slowly, calmly.
Loud words rarely cure anything.
She nodded, for the first time, with understanding, with trust. Not completely, but a little. The boy in the other room moved, and Mary closed her eyes for a second. For the first time, she wasn't afraid. The past was catching up. The silence on the farm was deceptive. In it lurked the icy grip of danger. While Mary Ellen tried to find peace at Eli's house, her past wasn't about to let go so easily. Along the dusty roads and forgotten trails, the gang, the men who knew Johnny Redford firsthand, were approaching inexorably. Those who remembered debts and promises, those who demanded their gold back, at any cost. They walked with coldness in their eyes and the weight of revolvers on their belts. Their voices, threats mixed with greed and anger, tore the silence, sparing neither child nor pregnant woman. To them, Mary was just an object of duty, part of a deal that could not be forgotten. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, fingers clutching the sheet so tightly that her skin turned white. Her heart pounded, not just loudly, but like a drumbeat, ominous and relentless. Scraps of memories swirled in her head. Johnny's words, his promises, his dashed hopes. She tried to believe that things were different now, that with Eli there was a new home, a new life. But that faith was as fragile as the thin ice beneath her feet. Fear crept into every cell, a reminder that the past never let go without a fight. She listened to every sound, trying to hear the enemy's footsteps, and mentally went over her plan: how to leave without hurting Eli, how to protect the baby. Her heart was pounding, but her mind tried to remain cold and calculating. If the gang found them here, it would be the end. For everyone. The silence on the farm seemed pressurized, like it was thickening and pulling at her, denying her the ability to breathe freely. Here, every silence was filled with anxiety. It was like the cluttered silence of an empty house, cold, lifeless, tense. It lived between the creak of the floor and the hushed echo of old footsteps, a reminder of imminent danger. One morning, when the first rays of sunlight were just timidly touching the ground, Mary decided to leave. No words, no goodbyes. She could not let Eli be hurt because of her. The horse sped forward, heavy hooves thumping rhythmically on the soft earth, kicking up clouds of dust that quickly dissolved into the cool air of the forest. Mary's every breath was intermittent, her heart pounding frantically, clutching her chest, and the boy, clinging to her hand, did not let go for a moment. His palm was cold and trembling, like an autumn leaf fluttering in the wind. The wind rustled in the crowns of the trees like a quiet whisper that carried with it the secrets of the forest. It touched Mary's face, reassuring her and at the same time reminding her of the unknown that lurked around every corner of the trail. It was as if nature itself were their ally, sheltering the fugitives from the prying sun and the eyes of strangers. But despite this temporary shelter, fear would not let go. She knew there was not only rescue ahead, but also new challenges hidden in the shadows of the dense trees. The forest seemed a living, breathing organism, and in its depths Mary sensed both danger and a strange peace, a quiet space where time seemed to slow down. Here the silence was different. Not crushing and cold, but filled with the rustling of leaves, the light breath of the wind, and the distant cry of birds. It was alive, filled with the sound of a world that was in no hurry to give up its secrets. But the forest kept its secrets. On the steep descent, the ground beneath her hooves became slippery with dew. The horse lost its balance, and in an instant Mary fell from the saddle, hitting her head on a cold rock. A sudden darkness came over her. The horse raced down the narrow forest path, the ground beneath its hooves growing increasingly slippery with dew. The branches of the twisted trees snapped against her skin, and the intertwined roots seemed ready to grab anyone who dared to pass too quickly. Mary clutched the reins as hard as she could, but control of the animal was slipping away. Suddenly, on one of the steep descents, the horse's foot slipped. The weight of his body threw him forward, and without warning, Mary lost her balance. She flew downward, and it was as if time had been stretched out. The wind whipped across her face, the air whistled in her ears, and the cold stone, hidden beneath a layer of wet foliage, met her forehead with brutal precision. A sharp, cutting pain ran through her head, causing her consciousness to cloud over. Darkness covered her like a thick blanket, robbing her of strength and words. Her heart raced, but her body wouldn't listen. Neither her arms nor her legs could move. Mary tried to inhale in panic, but her lungs shrank, leaving only the bitter taste of fear. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the crunch of twigs, the sound of approaching footsteps, but she couldn't make out who was coming. She prayed in her heart that someone would find me, that someone would come in time. She was afraid to die in this silence, in a place where even nature seemed both serene and merciless. In the abyss of semi-consciousness, there was only the muffled murmur and rhythm of her own heart. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey, fear gripping every muscle. She prayed in her heart that she would be found in time. There was a thick silence in the forest, not the silence of Eli's house, where the silence was heavy and tense, but a dwelling emptiness that muffled even his breathing. Here the silence was different, filled with the breath of nature, the rustle of leaves, the light breath of the wind. This silence was alive, and in it one could hear both pain and hope. The shadows of the trees weaved tightly over the path, as if they were trying to hide it from the world. Then a silhouette appeared between the trunks, a tall, powerful man with a face covered with dust and scars. It was Setany, a Navajo hunter and scout whose eyes reflected the calm and wisdom with which he was accustomed to reading the forest. He cautiously lowered himself beside him and spoke softly.
"Don't be afraid. I will help."
His hands were firm but gentle as he laid Mary gently on his cloak and placed a light bandage on her head. The boy, for the first time in a long time, took his eyes off the ground and clung to the stranger, hope in the gesture. Setany watched them with quiet confidence. In this forest, among the Navajo, silence made sense. It wasn't empty or cold, it was shelter, protection, and the beginning of a new life. The days that followed seemed like a different world. There was no rumble of the auction and the deafening silence of the farm. Instead, there was only the breath of the forest, the whisper of the wind, and the distant voice of the birds. The Navajo silence was as alive as the earth beneath his feet, filled with respect and harmony. Setany didn't interfere, but he was always there, like a shadow that protects rather than frightens. He let Mary be herself, neither demanding words nor rushing her. His calm presence became an island of safety in the sea of her worries. The boy began to come to life, a light appearing in his eyes that had long ago been extinguished. He repeated simple Navajo words after Setany, smiled quietly, played with the tribe's children. For Mary it was a small miracle, as if a tiny hope was slowly growing out of the ashes. One evening, as the fire cast soft reflections on their faces, Mary sat by the flames, covered with a warm blanket. The warmth of the fire couldn't quite chase away the chill inside, but here, in this circle, she felt for the first time that she would not be left alone. Setany crouched beside her without saying a word. The silence between them was filled with respect and the beginnings of trust. Mary stared into the fire where the shadows played and allowed herself to think about the future, that it could be more than just scary. In this quiet moment, amidst the ancient songs of the forest, her heart beat a little more evenly. She knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but the first step to a new life had already been taken. In a land of warriors. The forest slowly took Mary into its embrace. Each morning was like the beginning of a new chapter, with the fresh breath of the wind, the song of birds, and the smell of pine needles filling the air. Here, among the mighty pines and swaying grasses, time seemed to flow differently. Unlike the oppressive silence of Eli's farm, where every moment was taut as a bowstring, here the silence sounded like life filled with sounds that demanded no response, only respect. Setany, a Navajo hunter and scout, became her guardian and guide in this new world. His hands were strong but gentle, knowing herbs and healing wounds that left no trace of pain. Each day he brought herbal infusions, lit smoky plants on the fire, and his voice, quiet and confident, sounded like the ancient song of the forest. Mary watched him, feeling both gratitude and disbelief. Her heart still carried the weight of the past. But next to Setany, for the first time in a long time, she let her guard down, feeling the tension in her body fade. A storm of memories and feelings raged in her soul. Fear, bitterness of loss, and hope were tightly intertwined, like chains holding her back from complete release. Sometimes it seemed that the wounds of the past would never heal, that the shadows of her former life haunted her every step. But now, in the midst of nature, where the wind whispered words of comfort, she was learning to listen to herself anew, learning to forgive, learning to live. At times her thoughts returned to Eli and the boy, and she realized that this silence was not an escape, but a necessity. Setany talked about the tribe and the laws that ruled the lives of the warriors and guardians of the land.
The past is like a river.
He once said quietly.
It flows, but it doesn't always take everything with it. Sometimes it comes back to remind us. But we can choose which way we go.
These words penetrated deeply into Mary's mind. She knew she could not forget her former fears and pains, but now she could learn to live with them, to find peace in the present. He spoke little, but every word was imbued with respect for nature and ancestors. His eyes glowed with ancient wisdom, and Mary saw in him not just a man, but a man connected to something more. Several weeks passed, and in that time Mary could feel her wounded soul begin to heal. But the tribe did not remain silent witnesses to her recovery. The elders gathered in the hut, and a quiet but serious conversation broke out between them.
"This is a sign,"
said one of the elders.
"The spirits of the land sent her here for a reason. She must stay with us."
"She should become Setany's wife,"
the other added.
"It will strengthen the bond between her past and our land."
Mary heard about it through Setany when he came to see her in the evening. His eyes, usually calm, were serious this time.
They want you to stay, to be part of the tribe, part of me,
he said softly. A contradiction swirled in Mary's soul. Gratitude for her rescue, fear of her new life, and the bitter memory of her losses. She wasn't looking for love, wasn't hoping for it, but she realized that this offer was not just a gesture from the tribe, but a chance to start over.
I will agree.
She replied quietly.
Not out of love, but out of respect. Because you saved me and my son.
Setany nodded, accepting her words, and in that moment a new connection arose between them. Not loud and passionate, but quiet and spiritual, like the ancient song of the wind in the mountains. Nights in the tribe were filled with the sounds of drums and songs, each note telling a story of survival and strength. Mary listened to these melodies, feeling a part of her spirit tightly woven into the fabric of her new home. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but here, in the land of the warriors, she had found the first bit of peace in a long time. The tribe's mornings began with the first rays of the sun through the patterned curtains of branches and grasses. Mary awoke to the quiet rustle of waking life, the rustle of leaves, the light clatter of hoofs in the distance, the singing of birds unlike the familiar sounds of the old world. Everything breathed, lived, and spoke in a language she was only beginning to understand. The tribal camp stood in a small valley, sheltered by hills and surrounded by pine trees. The huts were made of wood and leather, decorated with patterns and symbols of ancestral memory. The women were gathering berries and herbs, the children were playing nearby, and the men were preparing for hunting and crafts. Setany is a man of few words, but his every move radiated confidence and a deep connection to the land. He showed Mary how to look for medicinal plants, how to listen to the forest to anticipate the approach of a beast or rain. His hands were strong but careful, as if he were handling a living part of nature itself. Mary found herself increasingly aware that for the first time in years, fear and pain were being replaced by a sense of peace. A new power was growing inside her, not loud, but quiet and steady, burning like coals in a fire. Her soul was beginning to absorb the wisdom of this place to find its footing. But the fear of the past did not leave her completely. Some nights, as the camp fell into slumber and the stars shone with cold light, the shadow of her former life loomed over her, cold and inescapable. She wondered, would she be able to put it all behind her? Would she be able to trust again? Setany seemed to sense her thoughts, though he rarely spoke them aloud. One day, sitting by the fire, he said quietly,
Your wounds are deep,
he said quietly.
but your spirit is strong. Time will heal, if you let it.
Mary put all her hope into those words. Her heart began to beat a little slower, a rhythm of life she could accept. When the elders announced the initiation ritual, Mary felt excitement and responsibility. In the circle of the tribe, to the sound of the tambourine and the whistling of the wind, she stood, feeling the touch of the earth beneath her feet and the warmth of Setani's hands. The ornament of feathers and stones symbolized the connection not only between them, but with the spirit of the tribe. This ceremony was not a marriage in the usual sense. It was a union of souls, a tribute, and a new beginning. Mary realized that she was not agreeing out of fear, but out of gratitude and a desire to find a home. That night by the fire, with the stars reflecting in her eyes, she felt for the first time that despite her fear and pain, she was not alone. Here, in the land of the warriors, her heart began to heal slowly but surely, a flame in the heart. Mary could no longer deny that a new feeling was beginning to flare up in her soul, quiet and warm, like a hidden flame. Setani, with his quiet confidence and gentle care, had become more than just a protector or teacher to her. His presence gave her days a special meaning and her nights a quiet peace she hadn't known for so long. But along with this new hope lived a bitter longing. Thoughts of Eli, the man who had once rescued her at the auction and who must never give up trying to find her. Setani had taught her not only to understand nature, but also to listen to her heart, but it was hard for Mary to break the link with the past. Sometimes she found herself dreaming of meeting Eli, of his warm gaze, of what she had once called home. In the back of her mind, she felt that love was not always simple or conflict-free. She longed for peace, but her heart was torn between two worlds, the old and the new. At this difficult moment, a wanderer arrived at the tribal camp, a healer from the Lakota tribe. His eyes, filled with wisdom and compassion, immediately recognized the heaviness Mary was carrying. The healer began to help her as labor approached, an event that was not only a test of the body, but also of inner strength. It was night when the pain seized Mary with unexpected force. She lay on a soft bed of herbs, surrounded by the women of the tribe, with Setani and the healer beside her. The pain was unbearable, sharp as a flame, but with it came something new, hope and life. A storm of emotions raged inside Mary, fear and despair struggling with the power of motherhood. She thought of the boy waiting for her in the new world, of Setani holding her hand, and of Eli. Where was he now? How did he feel? There was something tragically beautiful about this moment, the birth of new life in the heart of the past and the present, merging into one.
You're strong.
Setani said quietly, squeezing her hand.
Your soul is stronger than any fire.
The healer softly said prayers, touching Mary, helping her to endure. In that silence, filled only with her breathing and the pounding of her heart, Mary realized that the past pain would not go away, but now she could accept it, live it, and let it go. Eli, meanwhile, was following Mary's trail, obsessed with finding her and protecting her. He left behind his farm, his home, and his familiar world, leaving everything behind for her and the baby. His journey was long and arduous, but hope never left his heart. Finally, he reached the tribal camp where he first met Setani, the man with whom Mary now tied her fate. There was tension between the two men, not just a struggle over a woman, but a clash of two worlds and two views of life. They looked at each other with respect and caution. Eli saw Setani not as an enemy, but as a worthy rival, a man who could offer Mary what he could not yet. Setani, for his part, respected Eli's tenacity and determination, but he couldn't let his feelings cloud his judgment.
You've come far,
Setani said calmly.
but the way to her heart isn't as easy as it seems.
I'll go through fire and water,
Eli answered firmly.
because she's all I have left.
There were no loud words between them, only a deep understanding that the real struggle was internal, for Mary's happiness, for the right to be near her, for the opportunity to give her a new home. So in the heart of the tribe, not only the fires of the evenings were kindled, but also the flames of feelings intertwined with pain, hope, and struggle. Mary stood on the threshold of a new life, where love required courage and choice required fortitude. The pain grew, piercing every cell in Mary's body, making her whole being tense and shudder. She lay with clenched teeth, clinging to every moment, trying not to lose herself in the swirl of pain. A struggle raged inside her, fear of the unknown, anxiety for her child, and at the same time a desire not to give in, to go through this ordeal for the sake of a new beginning. Her thoughts were intertwined with her feelings. She remembered Eli, his hands that had once saved her, Setani's voice, quiet and sure, which now sounded close by, and the boy whose fragile world depended on her strength. "You're not alone," the wind seemed to whisper through the branches of the trees as Setani held her hand gently, his touch firm yet gentle, like a promise of protection. He didn't try to take the pain away with words. He was just there, giving support where strength was failing. Suddenly, the Lakota healer, calm and focused, placed a cool handkerchief to her forehead and then began to gently guide her breathing, helping her fight the contractions. His voice sounded like an ancient prayer, filling the space with strength and calm. In those moments, Mary realized how thin the line between life and death, between fear and hope, was. She clutched Setani's hand, feeling his support, but two strands of her heart were torn at the same time, her affection for him and her tender pain for Eli, who had followed her through the dangers. Meanwhile, Eli was approaching the camp. His eyes glowed with determination and the weariness of the long journey. The meeting with Setani was imminent, and there was tension in the air. Two men bound by one woman, one future, but different worlds. Their first encounter was quiet and tense, like the tense tension of a bow before a shot is fired.
"You gave her a home and peace,"
Eli began.
"but I've come to get her back."
Setani replied with quiet confidence.
Her heart is not a graveyard for the past. She will choose where her life will be lived.
There was no room for enmity between them, but rather a struggle of respect, recognition, and inner conflict. Both realized that they were not just rivals, but men who wanted to give Mary the best, each in his own way. In those moments when Mary gave birth to the baby, they left their differences behind the threshold of the camp. Eli watched from afar, worried, and Setani was by her side, cheering her every inhale and exhale. At last the moment came when the cry of the newborn broke the silence of the night. Mary, exhausted but happy, cradled the little life in her arms. In that moment, all doubts, fears, and competition receded, giving way to a new hope and love, a silent flame in her heart that lit the way forward. The right-o choose. The night was dark and thick, as if nature itself held its breath. In the distance came the thudding of hoofs, and a sound that made the hearts of the Navajo village clench with alarm. The band of bandits, the same bandits who had once pursued Mary, were returning. Their faces were contorted with anger and vengeance, and their eyes burned with wild fire. Eli stood beside Setani like a beast waiting to attack. There was no tension between them, only a silent brotherhood and a determination to protect those who had become family. Their gazes were cold and focused, each breath echoing in the charged air. To protect is to live. This thought seemed to repeat itself as the first shots cut through the silence of the night. Women and children hid in their huts, while the warriors went out to meet the danger without sparing themselves. Eli and Setani moved together as a unit, fending off each attack with cohesion and determination. Bullets whistled nearby, the ground heaving with hoofbeats and explosions. Their bodies worked to the limit, every muscle strained to the utmost. Between shots flashed glances of mutual understanding. In this battle there are no rivals, only allies. But the enemy was insidious and numerous. At a moment when victory seemed near, a single bullet pierced Setani's shoulder. His face contorted in pain, and he collapsed to his knees, leaning on Eli's arm.
Mary,
He whispered, his voice trembling.
be happy. Find your way.
Eli grabbed Setani's shoulder, trying to hold him back, but realized time was running out.
You're the best man.
Setani said, smiling wearily.
Take care of her.
His eyes closed and silence descended over the battlefield. Eli, clutching his friend's body in his arms, felt a fire ignite inside him. Not just rage, but a determination to live and fight for those he loved. The women and children, hearing of Setani's death, gathered around Eli, and in that moment it was clear that he was now the pillar and protector of the new family. On the horizon, dawn was coloring the sky blood red as a sign of the price paid for the right to choose and love. When the first shots rang out in the middle of the night, Mary froze in the cabin, her heart beating like crazy. All around her were screams, panic, thuds against the wooden walls. She could hear Eli's voice in the distance, strong and confident, calling for battle, and nearby, Setani's quiet but determined footsteps. Fear and burning hope intertwined inside her, like a flame that had nearly gone out but still held. The moment Setani fell with a loud scream and pain, Mary's world seemed to stop. A tear froze in her eye, hot and bitter. She couldn't believe that the man who had become a pillar and a light to her was now lying without strength. Her inner voice wavered between despair and the desire to be strong for the sake of her newborn child. Her lips trembled, and she whispered softly,
Don't go. Please.
Her hands clutched the edges of the blanket helplessly, and her heart was torn to pieces. But somewhere deep in her soul there was a silent promise to keep his memory alive and to go on living, no matter what. Eli, standing nearby, noticed her gaze and quietly stepped closer, taking Mary's hand. His voice, usually reserved and firm, trembled.
He wanted you to be happy. We'll protect you and the baby. Together.
Eli's eyes reflected not only the pain of loss, but also a firm resolve. He could see Mary struggling with her feelings, sadness for Seton, fear for the future, and a growing love for him. It wasn't easy, but he knew it was up to him now to make her believe in life again. The women of the tribe and the children, too, felt the weight of the moment. They gathered around, praying silently, crossing their arms and looking at Eli and Mary. Their eyes filled with sympathy and respect for those who stood guard over their world. The tribal elder spoke words of encouragement that sounded like a vow.
It's your destiny to go forward, despite the pain. We're all here for you.
Mary looked at the newborn baby, a small creature that was a symbol of hope and the future. In that moment, she realized that life would go on, and the choices she would have to make would not be easy, but necessary. The tears of bitter loss were slowly softened by the warm rays of dawn, and in the air hung the quiet promise of a new life and a new love yet to be found. Mary sat on the ground, cradling her newborn. The baby's slender fingers clung to her clothes like an anchor in a stormy sea. A storm was raging inside her, bitterness of loss, confusion, and yet growing strength. She looked at the spot where Setani had been lying, and it seemed that even the air around her was saturated with his spirit, calm and firm as he had been in life. Why so? She thought. Why did the one who taught me to trust have to leave first? How can I go on living without his quiet support? Her gaze met Eli's. He stood a little farther away, breathing hard after the battle, but there was no pity or sorrow in his eyes, only determination and concern. Eli slowly walked over, sat down next to her, and gently placed his hand on her shoulder.
Mary,
He said softly.
I know you're hurting right now. It hurts so bad it feels like your heart is being torn apart. But he'd want you to live. Not for me, not for anyone, for yourself and that baby.
She looked up at him, a flicker of doubt in her eyes.
How to move on? How to choose when there is so much pain and doubt inside?
You're not alone.
Eli answered.
You're stronger than you think. Setani called me the best person, and I'll try to be that for you and the baby. Not for the competition, for the sake of giving you a home and protection.
Mary clenched her fists, fighting the overhanging darkness. Maybe it's the right to choose, not just between people, but between fear and hope. She inhaled deeply, feeling the pain slowly give way to determination.
I won't forget Setany,
she said quietly.
but now I have to live for myself and for this child.
Eli nodded, and a silent understanding met in their gazes. Now there was no rivalry between them, but a journey together, not an easy one, but a real one. The flame in Mary's heart burned in a new way, not only from memories, but also from hope. In this dawn, she had accepted her right to choose to go forward, no matter what. After Setany's death, a heavy silence seemed to envelop the tribe's camp. The women and children, frightened and battle-weary, huddled together, unable to find words of comfort. Among them, Mary, holding her newborn in her arms, felt the weight of loss weighing on her chest like a stone, and at the same time a new resolve awakened. Eli gritted his teeth as he helped clear away the debris, lifting the wounded and comforting the worried. The depth of loss in his gaze was clear. Setany was not just a rival or a friend. He was a link between past and present, a symbol of hope that now seemed fragile. In the evening, by the fire, Mary and Eli sat side by side. The children of the tribe played around them, their laughter seeming ghostly in the shadow of loss. Mary spoke softly.
He always believed in me, in us. Now I must not let him down. Not just for the baby, but for the world he helped me see.
Eli looked at her with a soft warmth.
We will build this world together. We can't bring it back, but we can make the memory of it live on in our actions.
Mary felt the cold of loss being replaced by the warmth of a new beginning. All around them were people ready to fight and protect, to love and believe. Their future lives were in their hands, and she knew that to choose now was to move forward with an open heart, despite the pain. In that silence, filled with starlight and the whisper of the wind, Mary felt for the first time that her flame had not died out. It had simply changed shape, becoming a light that could lead to a new home. Hope Valley. The air was filled with the warm scents of freshly cut grass and flowering field plants. The wind gently ruffled Mary's hair as if whispering words of comfort and encouragement. She gazed at the horizon where the sky merged with the earth in a soft, almost dreamlike haze. Here, amid the silent expanse, it seemed as if nature itself was giving them a blessing for a new life. The boy sat beside her, his little fingers clutching Mary's hand tightly, and his eyes glittering with happiness and wonder.
Daddy,
He said again, and there was that simple but sincere confidence in his voice that penetrated the soul. Eli looked at Mary with a tenderness that could not be hidden behind words. His eyes reflected the silence of the evening, but there was a strong determination in them. He was ready to be a support, a protector, and a friend, anything she could want. Mary inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with freshness and hope. Mixed feelings rumbled inside her, the memory of pain, fear, and loss, but even stronger was gratitude that life had given her a second chance for happiness, for love, for a family. Her voice trembled but was filled with strength and light.
I was bought to be a shadow, but I became a light for 3 men. One I saved, one I buried, one I gave love to.
All her past and present, all the complexity of her journey was in those words, but now there was a flame burning in her that could not be extinguished. Eli touched her shoulder, and there was more promise in that simple gesture than in 1,000 words. The boy laughed, and it was the sound Mary had wanted to hear all her life, pure, serene, and hopeful. The valley ahead was quiet, spacious, and bright. They rode onward, leaving the shadows of the past behind them, and the quiet flame of new life, new love, and a new home burned in their hearts. Thank you for watching this story. This chapter of life is closed, but there are brand new stories, new heroes, and new destinies ahead. Each of them is a separate world, a separate journey that I am happy to share with you. If you want to follow along with me and discover new stories, subscribe, like, and leave a comment. I want to know what you think and what you're interested in. See you in new stories.